Conversations with Niki is brought to you by studyapps.co.za, South Africa's leading education app for tablets. Well, welcome to Conversations with Niki. I'm Niki Seberini, and thank you so much for tuning in. It is wonderful, wonderful to have you on board. I'd like to welcome our syndication partner listeners, and that is Radio Today in Johannesburg. It is Timaning Stereo 89.1, Eldo's FM, Chai FM, Kawi FM, West Coast FM, MC 90.3 FM in Plettenberg Bay, Neisner FM, Wild Coast FM, and Bay FM. Great to have you listening to the show, and as always, lovely to have you visiting the website, listening to those podcasts. As you know, each show is podcast. Just a couple of days after the show, you can find the show on the website, which is www.conversationswithniki.co.za. Niki is spelled Niki, and it's one word, conversationswithniki.co.za. So we know that June has been indeed a very interesting month. We were looking at Youth Day. We were looking at the 50th anniversary of the Rivonia trials. It's also a very significant day because it marks a month, because it marks Substance Abuse Awareness Month. And SADAG is a great runner and bringing a lot of attention towards the lack of help here in South Africa when it comes to substance abuse. And apparently by making it more of a day of awareness and people talking more about it, SADAG can penetrate markets more, especially looking at the poorer areas in the rural communities. So they have fantastic events planned for the day. They're going to be hosting over 40 substance abuse support group awareness events, so that's great. And I will be giving out that SADAG number at the end of the show. So why am I telling you all of this? Well, we've decided to focus on that during the show today. We're looking at substance abuse, and we're looking at personal stories shared today. And it's not all doom and gloom. These are stories of overcoming something that is a huge obstacle and coming out the other side. And I really, really hope that you're going to be moved by the show. I hope that the stories are going to be able to connect you to something. And even if you, in your personal capacity, don't suffer from any type of substance abuse, or people that you know, certainly the stories will connect you there. So I'm going to start off by introducing my first guest, who I first interviewed when he returned to South Africa. Now, it was in 1994, just before the first democratic elections here in South Africa, that Shani Krebbs went over to Thailand for a short holiday. And it was when he was returning to Johannesburg, he was stopped at the airport and he was searched, and he was arrested for trying to smuggle drugs out of the country. He was given the death penalty, in fact, and then it was reduced to 100 years, and we'll be talking to Shani about the story. But he served 18 years in a Thai prison, and he returned in 2012. He's written a book, and this is the kind of book that you take on holiday with you, and you don't leave your hotel room because you just want to continue reading. It's a big book. It tells a huge story, and it really is a riveting read. So Shani is in the studio here to share his quite unbelievable story with us. So Shani, thanks so much. It was lovely having you on the show before, and it's lovely having you on the show again.
Thank you, Niki. How are you doing?
Well, as I said when I saw you today, I feel like I know you so much better.
Well, I do feel kind of exposed. My whole life's in the book.
Well, that's true. I mean, how does it feel taking such a personal story and writing it down and getting everyone so involved in your story, really exposing yourself?
Well, the thing is, there's a huge message in the book, and by sharing my story, it gives people a different perspective on their own lives, especially people who are involved in drugs. So there is always hope, and I've always said where there's a will, there's a way. So from that aspect, I felt from an early stage into my confinement that I needed to tell my story. And the whole idea about dragons and butterflies was that it would make a difference to other people's lives and hopefully have an impact on them.
Was it difficult going back? Because, I mean, a lot of the stories that you share in the book are they're in absolute detail. I mean, it's as if these stories happened yesterday, and you're going all the way back to your childhood.
Well, I've been told that I've got an amazing memory.
Must have.
But I had quite a traumatic childhood, so I think when you suffer such trauma, for most of the years I kept it bottled up. And when I started writing the book and thinking back to what happened, it just all came flooding back. So it was almost like releasing all this pain and trauma, and it just came back to me.
Has it been a cathartic experience writing the book?
Yes, in a sense it has. I think although it's cathartic in that we probably get rid of a lot of the anger, but emotionally it's been difficult. I think some of the scars we suffer through our experiences take a lifetime to heal and may never heal.
Well, this is definitely a book about struggling and overcoming many, many challenges and ultimately redemption. And you write about that in the book. So let's talk about this childhood, this traumatic childhood that you had. Your parents were Hungarian immigrants.
That's right.
And your parents got divorced when you were just very young.
Yeah, I was 1 year old at the time, and then I had a stepfather.
Your mom remarried a very cruel man.
Yeah, that's right.
Janu.
His name was Janos.
Janos. And I when I was reading about your childhood and your descriptions and doing something naughty and getting caught, and his very almost he was almost I don't know, he was sadistic.
Yeah,
the terrible things that he did. I have to ask you, because I know your mother was quite volatile as well. Was she completely unaware of what was going on, or did she know?
You know what? She was also a victim, because the violence was from my mom. I mean, he used to hit my mom. So, but to me, it sort of became normal. I mean, I didn't think I was any different from other kids' parents. But I mean, attitudes have changed towards children, and I think my story resonates with a lot of people, because in those days there were parents who were strict and who used to hit the children. I mean, even at school we used to get flaps. So, it's difficult for me to explain whether my mom, she was aware of it, obviously, but sometimes she had no control.
Yeah. I mean, I'm only talking about this and looking at your youth and growing up in such an environment because of then what happened to you after you left school and after the army. I mean, there's one story which really stood out for me. Janos had these birds, these pigeons that he looked after, and a cat came into
devour them.
Yes. So tell us about the story, because I think it's so significant in then how you see the world after an experience like this.
Well, I mean, being so young, so I had the responsibility of taking care of them, and apparently I'd left the latch of the gate open, and the cat came in, devoured them. So that was my responsibility, and he went absolutely berserk on me. I don't know how that affected me later on in life, because at that age I don't think you can understand that sort of violence on a child and or abuse, and perhaps it made me violent as well, who knows. So I haven't actually gone into the psychology behind it, and whether that is responsible for my addiction or for becoming a drug dealer or for becoming wild. So I think it was numerous circumstances that led me to the path that eventually I did follow, and probably because when we went to boarding school I didn't have any parental guidance. So being an adventurous spirit and wild at heart, I became like a bad boy.
So they got divorced, and then your mother went back to Austria, and that's when you went to
Hungary.
Where did I say?
Yeah, Austria.
Oh, sorry, to Hungary, and then you were put in this orphanage.
That's right. That's right. So,
but you were very happy there, Shani.
I was because I was free. I wasn't subjected to that kind of abuse. So I mean, I only got involved in drugs from a trick. So I mean, I was a good sportsman, and I can't blame my parents for what became of me. But I think today, especially with the kids, I think peer pressure does play is a primary factor why kids do turn to drugs. Although for me it was more about maybe experimenting and not knowing that I had an addictive personality. was what became my problem, because I did. So I didn't know that at the time.
If we had to go back, though, to
Yeah.
this childhood that you're talking about, the one thing that did come out of it was that you and Joan, your sister, were very, very close. You had one another. You only really
Yeah,
had one
absolutely.
another. And it was, thank God for that, because she was such a huge support for you when you were incarcerated. I mean, she played a huge
No,
role.
absolutely. I couldn't have got through without her.
And it started
Yeah.
then, you know, the two of you
Yeah, well, it
against all
started
the
from a
odds when
young
you were
age. You know,
children.
even when we were kids, and my sister would get hiding and she'd be crying, and I would just automatically break out in tears, and for her as well. So we'd always like try and console each other. So we were very close from an early age.
Shani, in the book, you spend a lot of time writing about, as I said, your youth. So growing up, going to the army, gosh, the experiences in the army,
Yeah.
being in that type of solitary confinement because you went AWOL,
Yeah.
and just really painting this picture, and a lot of times of how how you got into drugs, how you then sold drugs, and the company that you kept. Were you tempted to hold back on that? I mean, did you want everyone to know just how low you had gone during that time?
Well, you know what? I mean, when you are on drugs, so you don't actually rationalize, or I didn't really care. I didn't care what people thought about me. But holding back in what way? Sorry.
Well, you expose yourself completely. You know, you're telling
as a drug dealer, or in the book?
you're telling everyone you're a drug dealer. You're sharing stories of being caught
Well, I
here
think
and
it's
there, having
important
fights.
for the reader to understand where I
You're
came
not painting
from.
a pretty picture of
Yeah,
yourself,
what I
is what
did,
I'm saying.
because that's who I was, and I was guilty, and so many of us can fall into that trap. So there's an important lesson behind it, and there was no ways of painting a pretty picture. I mean, that's who I was. And I think, you know, everybody deserves a second chance, and I managed to turn my life around. So if I could do it, there are so many other people who could do it. And also it's a lesson to the drug dealers, that they can see that actually they are the scum of the earth, just the same as I was.
Shani, you then eventually went to Thailand. I mean, you were really addicted to drugs at that stage. So you were dealing,
Yeah.
and you were addicted. So you were an addict, and
That's
you were in
right.
a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I suffered 2 seizures. I almost died.
Your sister Joan
Yeah.
was there by your side, doing everything she possibly could. What was going through your mind at the time? Was there any rational thought when you decided to then go to Thailand?
The idea of going to Thailand was to get away from drugs, get out of Joburg, get away from all the friends that I was using drugs with. So that was the idea for me to go away. But being such an addict, I just saw that as an opportunity to make more money, which I would just spend on using drugs again. So you know, you get so caught up that drugs start to control your life. And it's sad, because often you find that people might only go to a rehab once they hit rock bottom. So I'd actually hit rock bottom again for maybe the 3rd, 4th time. So going to Thailand would have also been a bit of a break. I'd stopped using drugs 2 weeks before I went away. So,
But you had stopped using before, though.
Yes.
I mean, you had got out of it before, and
Yeah,
then
like,
you got back into it.
Yeah, and then I'd relapse again. And so, I mean, I stopped a couple of times, try to get my act together, you know, because I also had a responsibility towards my family. Whenever I hit rock bottom, they would come and help me, and I would stay with them, so I couldn't exactly use drugs at their place. But I mean, I'd hit such a low that I was like knocking on death's door. So I had to stop, and then the minute I regained my strength and came back to Johannesburg and hooked up with my old friends, it was the same story all over again.
So being in Thailand, an opportunity came up for you to take drugs out of the country. Everything was prepared, everything was planned.
That's
Talk
right.
us through what happened on that day.
When I was caught. Okay, so I got the drugs in Bangkok in a hotel, and then when I went to the airport, I'd actually been watched, and I suspected that I was being watched. My taxi driver was an undercover cop. I was taken to the airport, and when I arrived there, I put my bags through the X-ray machine, and it went through no problems. I thought, wow, this is great, you know, it looks like I'm going to get away with it. And then when I went to the passport checking counter, I handed over my passport, and through the corner of my eye I saw some movement, and there was like these guys in black uniforms with walkie-talkies and Uzi machine guns, and before I knew it, I was surrounded. They pointed straight to the leather satchel that contained the drugs, and said, does this belong to you? I said, yes, it's mine. They said, please follow me. They didn't even bother to check my other luggage. I was taken to an interrogation room where they emptied the contents of the leather satchel, and then with a standing knife they cut it open, pulled out the heroin. It was then checked, and it was 100% pure China white. It was weighed. It weighed in at 2.4 kilos. And then I was subjected to a round of interrogation by the Thailand Drug Suppression Unit. When they finished with me, then I was questioned by the DEA. At that time, the DEA, America was fighting the war on drugs in Thailand. And before I knew it, I was just swamped by the media.
What was going through your mind? Did you think this is just a minor inconvenience, I'm going to get through this? Maybe I'll just have to pay a fine and then I'm out of here.
Well, before they cut the bag open, I thought maybe there's still a chance they won't find the drugs. But, I mean, it's like, you know, your whole life flashes through your mind. It was, I mean, I just thought, how did I get involved in this? And it's like a dream. I mean, you're thinking this in the book I explain it as like watching a movie. I mean, it was like a movie. You're in such a state of shock that you actually feel numb. So I was just hoping it would get over with, and that hopefully I could get a lawyer. So I mean, there was a lot going through my mind, my family and everything. So
Shani, but when they questioned you and they wanted to know more information, you weren't prepared to give anyone up. And you write about this code of honor throughout the book, about not being a snitch, and on not telling on anybody else. An American was arrested. He gave the information that he had to, and within how long was he?
It was 4 years that he was transferred back to America and released.
Right. So, but you had this code of honor. You did not want to be the snitch, and 18 years of your life was spent in a Thai jail. And I just found that amazing. Throughout the book, you just stood so strong, and you weren't prepared to waver when it came to this code of honor. If you had to go back to that day when they were interrogating you, knowing that if you had perhaps given a few names away, you would have been given less time.
I would never have done it.
Never.
No.
Okay. I mean, hindsight.
No, because you know what? I grew up on the streets of Joburg. I was in boarding school. As kids, we used to hit the younger kids if they tittle-tailed. So it was kind of inbred. So it's just, I've always stuck by that. It's not my what's the name? My duty or my right to actually determine another person's destiny. Whoever gave me the drugs, they would have their own bad karma. So that's the reason.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Thank you.
Not many people, I think, would be able to do that. So you were then, your first experience going into this kind of holding cell, and overcrowded, and the sanitation was absolutely despicable, and you were just thrust into this world that was just something that you possibly saw in a movie, and hoped that it would never ever happen to you, and there you found yourself in that situation. Can you perhaps just tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, you know what, being a foreigner in a foreign country as well, not speaking the language, it's a completely different culture. I mean, I'd never been to prison before, so it's a shock. It was the same as at the airport, and even while I was at the police station, I mean, I knew that I was going to prison, and make no mistake, I knew that it wasn't going to be easy, and that I was in for a big shock. So I kind of, in those 7 days, I started exercising in the police cell and tried to prepare myself mentally. But nothing could have prepared me actually for what I was about to encounter. So you just rely on your survival skills. I mean, you'd be quite surprised how resilient we are. I mean, humans by nature, we adapt. And I had no choice, so it was either adapt or die. But I mean, it was horrific. It was scary. I was scared. I couldn't sleep. I sat with a pen, but I knew that the worst thing that could happen to me was I'd be killed. And when you are in prison, there's always a chance. There's the danger element, so there's always the risk that something could happen to you. So there was no point in me crying about the situation. So I just had to adapt very fast and just stand my ground and stand up for what I believed was right. And I did that from the word go.
You were first given the death penalty.
That's correct.
Okay. And then it was reduced to 100 years. How did that work?
Okay, so basically what happens if you plead guilty and you don't fight your case, and when you do fight your case, it's like an insult to the Thai judiciary. So they'll give you the death penalty, but because you pleaded guilty, to be commuted to a life sentence, which is equivalent to 100 years.
Which was reduced over time through many efforts on your on your behalf and Joan's behalf as well. What I found interesting about the Thai jail is that you're not just automatically given a meal, automatically given water, automatically given anything. If you don't have money where you can pay for services and bribe officials, you're not going to survive for very long. How long did it take you to realize that when you were in that jail?
Well, initially, we actually, the United Nations gives the prison a subsidy, which I think we got something like 2 eggs a day in Bombard, and the food that they provide is virtually inedible. So from the first few days that I was there, I understood that this was going to be hard. I mean, we managed to get some pilchards because you could order it from the coffee shop, and this mama, which is this instant noodle. So you survived on the bare minimals, but you could also get parcels. So, my family would send me stuff from home, like cheese and a couple of luxury items. In Bang Kwan, in the building that I was in, they did have a bakery, and so if you did have money, then you could order fresh groceries from outside and have somebody cook your meals for you. So, I mean, there are people who survive on that food, but they break out in skin rashes, they become malnutrition.
But they don't get fresh water?
Well, you could boil the water, so the guys were boiling the water, but eventually they did bring bottled water into the prison, which you could buy through the prison coffee shop. So, but you needed money, so there were guys that worked, and I mean there was a lot of money in the prison because you had a lot of the big drug dealers there, especially amongst the Thais and some of the other Asian prisoners.
Amazing that drugs were just so easily available in prison.
Well, I think it's in every prison all over the world, especially in the maximum security prisons, because if there weren't drugs, it would become a very volatile situation.
Okay.
So it's far easier for the guards to control the prisoners when they're out of it.
But you refused to take drugs. You were clean, you weren't going to take any drugs, you weren't going to be tempted, but you found yourself in this situation where you had no privacy, your dignity, well, it depends how we look at dignity, had been taken away from you, and you were going to be like this for the rest of your life, really.
You're reduced to nothing,
you're
basically.
Reduced to, exactly.
You're a number. I did use drugs for the first year that I was in prison, which was mainly hashish. But also seeing people using drugs on such a large scale, and heroin was never my drug of choice, but there were prisoners who came in like for murder cases and that who would turn to drugs because it was one way of blocking it out. But also it's not the environment where it's safe to use drugs, and having lost my freedom over drugs, I mean, I would have been a fool to carry on using. I mean, I'm facing a life sentence, but I mean, by all ration, I mean, I should have maybe turned to drugs to get through my days.
I mean, how does one wake up in the morning when you're faced with so much, and you think, well, this is the lot. This is what I'm going to be experiencing for the rest of my life. How do you get through the day? Well, how do you find something to live for? Where's the purpose?
Well, you have to dig real deep, and in my book, when you've read it, I started rediscovering who I was. So I saw going to prison as an opportunity to change, not necessarily like the end of the road. For me, it was the beginning of a new life, but obviously I didn't realize that in the first year. But I said to my sister that I was innocent of the crime, and that I was under the impression that I was smuggling forged currency. So on that pretext, my sister was fighting to try and get me released, and there were a lot of prominent politicians, businessmen involved in my case from an early stage. So already there was some hope. And then in 1996, after 2 years of being there, the king celebrated his 50th anniversary to the throne, and my sentence got reduced from life to 40 years. So then that's already like telling me that, wow,
there's hope.
Yeah, and there is always hope. But it was difficult. The first 2 years were really difficult.
Well, just taken from your book, and once again the book, Dragons and Butterflies, May I read a part
sure.
of it? Okay, you say, "It came to me one night in a vision that before I would be emancipated, I would go through 3 levels of evolution: artistically, spiritually, and as a person. I knew I had to change. I needed to redeem myself. In my mind, there was still too much turmoil, however, that needed to be quieted. The battle raged on inside me." So you're talking about the battle raging on inside you, but there was also a continual battle around you, and you seemed to be fighting the fight for everyone. You were writing letters, people were signing petitions, you felt that you were being unfairly treated, you were sending letters out to the right people, you felt that you wanted telephones installed just for your dignity, and you wrote the letters. Did you find a person, did you find a whole new side to Shani being in that prison? And fighting a fight?
Well, even in my youth, when I was in Arcadia, I was the head boy, so I would always protect the weak. And the whole idea was, I mean, when I went to the prison, I couldn't believe the human rights violations. And coming from a democratic country, so to speak, I mean, we always had a voice in South Africa, and there weren't these kind of human rights violations. And so I thought that by standing up for my rights and maybe trying to bring about some changes in the prison, we could eventually maybe have the sentences reduced, or maybe I'd be a thorn in their side and they just want to get rid of me. So there was that aspect as well. But I made an oath from when I was in the prison cells that I would stand up for what I believed that was right. So I stood by my guns all the way.
So you had a lot of time to think. You found you enjoyed your art before at school, but you really reconnected with that artistic side in yourself.
Yeah.
You spent a lot of your time drawing and painting, connecting. You were writing letters because, of course, these articles were going out in magazines and newspapers in South Africa. So you had all these people who were writing and connecting with you, and all of this was happening. Did you spend a lot of time thinking about your past? You talk about the evolution, you talk about that this was a start of a new life. Did you feel that what you had done in your past was wrong? And on some level this was a just way of paying for it?
Yeah, absolutely. I did reflect, especially once my mind was more clear, drugs were completely out of my system. So I kind of went back in time. So I was 34 years old, but I was starting my life in prison as a 17-year-old before I used drugs. So I did get the opportunity to reflect. We did have a lot of time, and where I went wrong and what I could have done differently to maybe become the person that I dreamt I would be. So, but I mean, it would be difficult to go back in time and say, what if this, what if that? So this is what the situation was. And I had an opportunity to rectify all my wrongs. And I'd made all the wrong choices as a youngster. And that's what led me to actually going to prison. So often when I sign my book, I write in it that the choices we make define who we are and will ultimately determine our destiny.
So true. We're going to be talking to other people in the second half of the show also about drug addiction and the 12-step program being so important. And the 12-step program handing the power over to a higher force or to a God, and you seem to do that without going through the 12-step program. If I may just read a part of the book, you say, with everything that happened to me thus far, my outlook on life was gradually changing. My eyes were opening and my faith in God was slowly being strengthened. Remember, at the beginning you were so angry with God that this had happened to you, and you continue. As I began evolving, so I began to discover who I was. For the first time in my life, I was setting goals. My head was filled with dreams. I was looking to the future and not just living in the moment. I sometimes wondered where I would have been if I had not ended up in prison in Bangkok. More than likely in a prison in South Africa or 6 feet under in West Park Cemetery. So you found God. You found God in this time. Was it a case of handing things over? You'd overcome. You'd given up the drugs, but the whole experience you were handing over to God. That's what you said to your sister. I can't rely on anyone else. There's just one thing that I can rely on.
Well, I do come from a very spiritual background. Growing up in Arcadia, I went to Benakiva camp. I was at King David Victory Park. We used to go to shul 3 times a day. So I was always very spiritual and had faith in God. And then when I started to realize where I'd gone wrong in my life, and through my faith, I got the courage to get through every day. So I did reconnect with God. I'm not religious in the conventional sense, as some people are, but I got this connection, and I believe that through my connection, I had these visions and even had conversations with God. There's this inner voice that used to speak to me, and once I understood why I was in prison, I actually became content, and having faith helped me through all that. So yes, I did reconnect with God, and I found Him.
Let's take a break. We'll be right back.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, my name is S.V. Prinsloo, and I'm the HOD of IT Integration at Bridwin Preparatory School in Melrose. We started using study apps about 6 months ago and have seen astonishing results. We were quite amazed to see how quickly the kids have been able to use study apps and the benefits it has shown with regards to reinforcing what they've already learned inside the classroom. I would highly recommend study apps for any school.
Studyapps.co.za. Well, welcome. This is Conversations with Niki. I'm Niki Seberini, delighted to be with you. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks to our syndication partner listeners as well. That is Radio Today in Joburg, Eldos FM, Chai FM, Kawi FM, West Coast FM, MC 90.3 FM in Plettenberg Bay, Neisen FM, Wild Coast FM, Bay FM, and Timaning Stereo 89.1. That's in the Northern Cape. So we're looking at the month of June, and I was saying that we're looking at the International Day Against Drug Abuse and Illicit Trafficking. And I have Shani Krebbs in the studio, who has written a book telling the story of his life, but focusing obviously a lot on his incarceration, being imprisoned for 18 years in a Thai jail. And his book, Dragons and Butterflies, we haven't even got to why it's called Dragons and Butterflies yet. But just, I mean, it's a huge, huge book. And it goes all the way from Shani's childhood through to his school years, being a drug dealer later on in life, and then eventually being caught smuggling drugs out of Thailand, and as I said, being imprisoned for 18 years. He's come out and he's written this book, and he is sharing the story. And we are also going to be talking to, in a moment, Anne Brest, who wrote a book, Catastrophe, and Anne's daughter Angela is in the studio as well to share her story. But Shani, I just want to ask you, because your sister Joan, we spoke about how this childhood of yours, I don't know if it was just that the two of you were very close, or if it was the circumstances that just brought you so close. You were two halves of a whole, you and Joan.
Yeah.
And this really came out when you were imprisoned, because even though you had caused a lot of trauma for her here in Johannesburg before you went over, she was there for you. She was fighting your cause. She was sending money every single month. She was just incredible, a huge support. How do you think, how did that help you in the 18 years, knowing that Joan was there?
I mean, she was my rock. If not for her, I would have probably resorted to maybe dealing drugs in prison. I might never have got out of prison without the support of my family. And that was one of the primary factors why I also gave up drugs, because I realized that I had a responsibility towards my family, because they were the only ones that actually care for you. Most of my friends had abandoned me. Even in Johannesburg, whenever I hit rock bottom, the only people that ever came to my assistance would be my family. And family played a huge role in me getting through 18 years of prison.
When you spoke about when you are an addict, you don't really think about anyone else, you're thinking about yourself.
Yeah.
And when you were in jail and you were working on yourself and you had the spiritual connection and you knew that there was something larger at play, did you spend a lot of time thinking about the impact that it was having on your sister? And how do you deal with something like that when there's not much you can do, because you thousands of miles away and you can't even speak?
I mean, she had 1 or 2 breakdowns. And whenever I wrote to her, I would tell her I'm fine. So for me, the most important thing was for her to have peace of mind, and knowing that the money she was sending me, I wasn't squandering on drugs, but I was using it to survive. So I never complained to my sister. she had to be strong, because if she wasn't strong, then it would affect my life in prison. So as hard as I tried to always put her mind at ease, she's still worried. But we made actually a great team, and at the end of the day, I mean, we do have a responsibility to our family, because they're the only ones that love and care for us. And Joan always came through for me. And that's, like I said, that was my motive.
When did she find out that you actually knowingly were trying to smuggle the drugs out? Because in the beginning, you told her that, you know, you'd been set up.
Yeah. So, I mean, I lived with that life for 18 years. But I justified it by the ridiculous sentence imposed and the fact that I was set up. So I actually told her, it was like the morning when, just before I went on the John Robbie show, that I said to her that I'm going to come clean. And she said to me, you know what, you did the time. And
is that what she said?
Yeah.
She wasn't angry?
No, not at all. She just said that, you know, it's going to be embarrassing for her to face some of the people that she had told the lie to. So
putting it in the book, and again putting it out so publicly, it was all part of this experience of moving on. Yeah,
absolutely. You know, I mean, the thing is, I don't think you ever move on. I think, you know, the past will always be with us, because we learn by our mistakes. But I did come clean with it, and I think a lot of people have forgiven me, because I've turned my life around. Different if I lied about it and I still came out and I was still dealing drugs. I mean, I'm an anti-drug campaignist. I speak at schools. So so in a sense, we are moving on.
So Shani, you're back.
Yeah.
I'm sure it must have been very difficult to, after 18 years, first of all, to come back to a completely different South Africa to the one you had left in 1994.
Absolutely.
Friends coming and going, family coming and going, and having to face people, as you say, people that perhaps you wronged, and you've come back after 18 years and you have to make things right.
Yeah. Funny thing happened to me, actually, because I reconnected with one of my friends who I haven't seen like for 18 years. We were actually doing coke 2-3 weeks before I went to Thailand, and we were talking about my story, and I was saying to him how if I didn't go to prison I probably wouldn't be here today. And he said something very profound to me. He said, if you didn't go to prison, I'd also probably be dead. And that this has kind of stuck with me. And you know, all the people that I've wronged, obviously I can't make anything right. Some of them I probably destroyed their lives. Many of them are dead. It's just something I will have to live with. But I now paint pictures, I paint people's portraits. So instead of destroying lives, I'm bringing joy to people's lives. And I think everybody deserves a second chance. And hopefully my story will have an impact on people, and they could learn by my mistakes.
Thanks for that, Shani. Well, we're almost going to now shine the light on the family and those who are affected a lot by the drugs, families that have been completely torn apart. And as I said when I started the show, is that both of the stories that you're hearing today show that the light at the end of the tunnel is very bright. You've just got to know that you have to keep walking towards it. So Anne Breast, a Lapidus Breast, who wrote Catastrophe, Oy vey, my child is gay and an addict. Thank you so much for coming into the studio.
You're welcome, Niki.
To share your story. Thank you, Anne. And Angela, thank you for coming in, because this is a story about you.
It is a story about me.
And I think you're very brave. It's not easy to have a story told about you and having everything so private exposed in this way. And I think it's incredible that people are going to learn from it kind of at your expense.
Yeah, well, I think that's what's kind of kept me going. Initially, it was quite overwhelming for me. A lot of my shame came back up, thinking that the whole of Sandton, the whole of Joburg, now the book is overseas as well, so internationally people know all the shameful things that I did. And then I decided to take a different approach and think that if we can help people by sharing the intimate details of what went wrong and what I did, and my disease of addiction, if we can help just one person, then it kind of makes it all worthwhile.
And what has the response been so far?
The response has been amazing, really positive. A lot of people are asking for help. A lot of people are private messaging and emailing my mom and myself to ask where they can get help from, and are thanking us for our honesty and for our courage, because I think if one person comes out and says, this is what happened, this is how it was, people relate to that. People can identify with that. And it makes it easier. It kind of paths the way for other people to seek help.
Well, I must say, and reading the book, I was reading it almost as a parent, and I could so relate to so much, because it doesn't matter what our child is doing. It doesn't matter what they're up to. They are part of us. And we always want to believe that they're doing the right thing. We never want to think that what they're doing is wrong. And that's really what jumped out at me with this book, is just you're wanting to believe that Angela was okay, that she wasn't doing what she was doing, and you just kept holding on. The love of a mother, the love of a parent is incredible. Just like Shani, the love of Joan, her love for you, it's incredible. And it starts off and it says, when did it begin? And why? When did I begin to notice? And why hadn't I noticed before? And why me? Why had I done wrong? They say I wasn't the cause, that it wasn't my fault, and that I couldn't fix it. Then why did I feel so damn guilty? Is that why you wrote this book?
I think initially I decided to write the book because I wanted to get closer to my daughter. We had not been having a very great time over many years, and I didn't want to be one of the parents on the outside looking in and maybe seen as a bit of a nuisance. I wanted to be on my daughter's level. I wanted to learn about the drugs, and I wanted to help people as well. In fact, a friend of mine said that when she read the book, she wanted to take me and shake me, because I was just so much in denial. I just couldn't believe it. So
you didn't want to believe it?
I didn't want to believe it, and I didn't think it was possible, because having seen the movie Midnight Express in the 1970s, I had a terrible perception of drug dealers, drug pushers, people who smuggle drugs. I was so scared from having seen that movie, and I just wanted to try and learn more about what it was really like for drug addicts, because it's not the people on the streets in Hillbrow. It doesn't matter what colour you are, whether you're rich or poor, religious or not, Jewish or Christian. Drug addiction affects everybody, and I wanted to share my story with other mothers who would recognize from what I went through. They would say, well, hey, hang on a minute, this is happening to me. And it's been very good, because we've had the most incredible response, and as Angela said, I get people phoning me all times of day or night. I'm not an expert at all in drug addiction, but I'm doing a course with Houghton House, Ellie Garb and Alex Hamlin. Sorry, mind went blank. And it's been amazing, and this is just the beginning of my journey now. I want to learn more and try and help, but I also feel that we're maybe fighting a losing battle, because for every one who recovers, there's few who don't recover.
Well, that's what we need to be talking about. We need to be sharing these stories, and we need to see that, as I said, there's this light at the end of the tunnel. So, Angela, let's start off with you, because your parents got divorced when you were young, and your dad remarried, and he was very busy with his other life, and this had a huge effect on you.
Yes, it did. I'd be lying if I said it didn't. I think for many years I tried to pretend that it didn't have, I built this very tough exterior, put up these walls, so that people wouldn't see the vulnerability and the hurt. And sure, it did definitely play a large role in making me feel less than and not good enough, because he had a new family. He was a very attentive father to my younger sisters. He was a very good husband. They went on holidays, and my brother and I were not receiving the same kind of attention, and so it definitely contributed in my younger years to feeling less than and not good enough.
Kind of like an outsider.
Very much so.
And at the end of the book, when you write about your feelings and, you and your mom working through issues, because I wondered at the beginning, why would she put in the title, Oy vey, my child is gay and an addict? Like, why is that relevant? And where is the relevance within that? But you can expand on that.
Initially the book was meant to be called Catastrophe. That's what my mom and I chose. Well, she had chosen, I agreed, because my drug of choice was cat, and it was a play on the words cat catastrophe. The publishers felt that it would sell better if they had Oy vey, my child is gay and an addict. So what was the question?
I do the same thing.
Okay, so the relevance of putting in why you were gay, which is actually very important, because you explained later on what an impact it had on you. When we're talking about feeling like an outsider.
Sure. So yes, from a very young age, I felt like I didn't belong. I felt different, not good enough. Not that it was my family's fault, but I kind of grew up with the notion that, I grew up in a traditional Orthodox Jewish home, and I understood that homosexuality was a big no-no. In all religion, it's a big no-no. And so I had an incredible amount of shame around that. And so for many, many, many years, I kept that secret to myself.
Because, I mean, you had a boyfriend for many years.
Yeah.
Weren't you engaged?
No.
No, you weren't engaged. Oh, your mother wanted you to be engaged.
Not to him, I wasn't.
Okay, but I mean, you were in this relationship for years, but so you were living this double life.
I was living a double life,
Mm.
and so lying for me started really young, pretending to be something that I wasn't, to make other people happy, because I thought that if I didn't, they would reject me, they would abandon me. It was all my stuff. It wasn't. I know now in hindsight that my family would never have abandoned me or rejected me. And it was one of the biggest lessons I've learned out of all of this is communication. If I would have been able to communicate from a young age how I was feeling, whether I would have walked down this road, I don't know.
Gosh, that's such an important thing to say.
Yeah.
The ability to communicate and say how we really feel about something. I think it's a huge lesson there. So when were you first introduced to drugs? What was your first experience?
I was 19 years old. I was overseas at the time with my boyfriend, and it was marijuana. I didn't experiment for a long time after that. It was, for me, I really got into the heavier using or the more frequent using in my early-ish 20s or mid-20s. And then I suffered a loss in my family. My younger sister passed away. And for me, that trauma kind of spiraled my addiction into no man's land. I wasn't able to deal with the pain. I wasn't able to communicate how I was feeling. I just didn't want to have to feel those feelings, coupled with the shame and guilt from having been dishonest from my childhood about my sexuality and a whole bunch of other factors. That's when it became easier to use drugs than to actually deal with what was really going on for me.
Was it difficult to get your hands on drugs?
No.
Do you have a particular dealer that you dealt with, or it was a friend, or I'm just bringing it in with Shani sitting here listening.
Supplied Angela.
Because I mean he is the reformed drug addict and the drug dealer, but I mean we're sitting in a room, with the drug dealer here, and this is part of your story as well.
In the beginning, I used to get from friends, so I wasn't buying my own drugs, and through them I obviously was introduced to different drug dealers, and so I had one or two drug dealers. If one wasn't available, there was always the other one, because the worst thing you can do is leave an addict hanging.
Well, of course, taking drugs costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
So you were losing jobs. You then started to steal. And what I found interesting, Shani spoke a little bit earlier and said, you don't think about anybody else. You're just thinking about what you're doing, getting the next drug, and that's that. I mean, did it ever cross your mind that what you were doing was wrong, that it was,
my mom
destroying your mom?
She asked me the same question when she was writing the book, and we were going through some facts and chronological order, and the truth was no. I didn't take my family into account. I think for me that it was far more important for me to get my hands on my drugs than it was to take into account that I was hurting other people. There was a huge element of denial for me, like my using drugs is not hurting anybody else. Lo and behold, I was completely wrong. I caused a lot of devastation and a lot of pain. But the first thoughts that went through my mind when I was, helping myself to other people's money was definitely not my family. It was, I need to not feel, I need to get my hands on another fix. This is what I need to do.
You said your drug of choice was
cat.
Was cat. What is that?
Poison. It's a synthetic, man-made concoction of horrific things. I can't.
Do you smoke it? Do you inject it? What do you
snort
do
it.
You snort it. And how long does that high usually last?
Well, in the beginning it lasts, maybe 10 minutes or so, and towards the end it's a couple of minutes. Not even in the beginning. Sorry, I'm lying. In the beginning it's about an hour or so, and towards the end it's every couple of minutes that you need.
So, Angela, so then what do you become addicted to? That instant reaction to the drug, and then as it disappears, you think, I want more of this. Were you able to hold it off for a while? Your experience.
Yeah, a difficult question to answer, because the brain chemistry comes into play, and it's the dopamine and you know what chemicals your brain releases when you have the drug, and because you know, addiction is a disease. It's classified by the World Health Organization as a disease. But for me, it was the not feeling. You know, it made me numb, emotionally, physically, you know, spiritually. I was numb. And that was important to me, to not have to feel any feeling, because the minute I had to feel, the conscience came into play, and so the shame would come back to the surface. So it was about bottling those, or pushing those feelings right down to the pit of my stomach, so that I didn't actually have to deal with my reality, which was that I had messed up totally.
And Angela moved out, but then she moved back in.
Yes.
And you were keeping quite a close eye on her. But you really were carrying on. You were a photographer, and you were very busy taking your pictures, doing a bit of traveling here and there. And then you slowly started to notice things going missing.
Correct.
And I find that very interesting in human nature, not just in this instant, but we always second guess. If something goes missing, we think, no. Or maybe I've made the mistake, or maybe it hasn't really happened. But you kept thinking that nothing really was wrong. And I want to know what was going on at the back of your mind. I want to know what was really happening I'm not talking about the mother protecting the daughter.
Well, Niki, to try and answer that question, it did not seem a possibility to me that my daughter would take money out of my purse. And there was nobody else in the house that could have. I mean, Lionel, my partner, I knew it wasn't him. And Helen, my domestic, I mean, I would take poison. It definitely wasn't Helen. So who else could it have been? I was thinking that maybe somebody was coming into the house, you know, bizarre thoughts. Maybe some of the staff who work in the complex were coming in, helping themselves to my money. And eventually I thought, well, nobody's taking my money. I thought I had 300 rand. I only had 20. It's me all the time, until eventually, and this shows the power of my own denial, I wrote down that I had 350 rand in my purse. Angela came and she left, and I went up and I counted 250. And I thought, well, I obviously didn't count correctly. So I was hugely in denial, and even when I was finally faced with the reality, I still kept saying there must be some explanation, which is why not only my friend Natalie Miller, and she said I could use her name, said that she wanted to take me and shake me, but one of Angela's, the youngest sister from her father's first marriage, sent me a letter one day. She was 100% correct in everything she said. Of course, the letter tore me apart because I found it very harsh, but she spoke the truth, and it did wake me up, and I thought, well, why am I doing this? Why am I in denial? And it took me a long time, I think, until the final crunch came, until I finally woke up and realized. But it's very, very difficult.
So the denial was a huge part of this process. But once you had realized that you had to actually face what was happening, how did it change from there?
Well, how
important is it to face what is happening?
It's 100% important, Niki, because if you don't face what's happening, you're not doing your child any service, which is what Angela's sister said to me. I'm failing. She said, you are failing Angela. Those are the very words.
Sure. You thought you were doing the opposite.
Yes, I thought I was great. I thought I was fantastic. Here she moved back home. Of course, she and my partner fought like cat and dog. They were at each other's throats all the time, and I was in the middle, and it was very hard. But, you know, I love my daughter. I love my partner. It was really difficult. I mean, Shani knows the setup, because Shani, I actually typed from cover to cover dragons and butterflies. So Shani spent a huge amount of time in my home and knew the story. So I had to take responsibility, and the first thing I did was I took Angela to Gay Turiel, and I had a drug test. Of course, Angela was hating me in that moment, and I was feeling guilty. I thought, you know, here I'm taking my daughter, maybe she's not using drugs. What am I doing? And I was afraid I would lose her, which is one of the reasons that I didn't act more strongly right throughout the whole saga. But Gay did find something, and Angela went off to first step, and from there on in, I tried to help by, reporting in if I found something was missing, or I found a little rolled up note, I found a little paper plastic bag. I called in her counsellors. I didn't do enough, but I was certainly on a better path.
I don't want to give too much away because I want people to read the book, and I think the end is so very powerful. Must have been very powerful for you to read that, Angela.
Yeah,
your final gift, but that's all I'm going to say, because you are left with a final gift at the end. But I just want to talk about being grateful in the book, and you write, Anne, as I look at Angela, I see the fruits of her recovery growing before my eyes. And I'm so grateful to her for turning her life around, for regaining faith in herself, for having climbed out of that very dark and very black hole she had dug for herself. I'm grateful to her for attending her meetings, for listening to her counselors, her sponsor, for walking the talk, for cleaning up her act, for getting me to learn to trust her again, and most of all, for all her hard work and dedication to getting clean. And there's a mother's love letter to her daughter. So has this experience, Angela, brought you and your mother together? And do you think this has been part of your journey?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that for me the most important thing was that we learned to communicate, and I learned to see how my disease and my addiction had hurt her and my family, because I wasn't able to see that during active addiction, and she was able to understand better that I wasn't a bad person doing bad things, but that I was a sick person who was desperate to get my hands on the next drug, and that I actually did have a moral compass that just I'd lost my way, and I think that it really worked wonders for our relationship. And we're now known as Team Oy Vey.
Team Oy Vey. So this has been a good experience.
It has been.
Writing the book. It's almost been the end of this particular chapter of your life.
Sure.
Okay. Well, we'll continue talking. Shani, so you're sitting here and you're busy listening to this, and we know now that you know Anne, so you know the story.
Yeah.
And when you hear these stories, I mean, how do you feel? What is your response when you hear stories like this?
It's hard for me because, in a way, I did destroy people's lives as well. And at the same time, as a drug dealer and a drug addict, you don't actually consider, what it's doing to other people. There were stages where friends of mine were like really getting bad, and they'd like stop working, and then I would have to say to them, listen, like it's really getting bad, you should stop. So I wouldn't like supply them right to the point where they hit rock bottom, but like for me, I was in it for the money and also to get high. So you don't take the consequences of what you're doing to other people's and destroying their lives. So yeah, I'm kind of feel sad in a way, and happy to see that Angela eventually realized that she had a responsibility to her mom as well. It is a disease, and I agree with Angela with that, because I was an addict for 16 years, and there was no ways I could stop. And the only way I could stop was by having like a life-altering experience, which was going to prison. And then realizing that actually the devastation we were causing to our families. And at the end of the day, the only people that would stand by us was our families, which was quite ironic actually, because we were causing them the most pain.
And yet they were there for you.
Yeah, so
pull you out of it.
I think the fact that Anne has written this book, I think it's amazing, and I think there's a lot of people can learn from it, because a lot of parents are in denial, and some of my talks that I attend, there are parents who are using drugs, and then they wonder why their kids are suddenly smoking weed or something, or there are kids who are using it and their parents have got no idea about it. So there is a very important message in Anne's book.
So what do we do about the substance abuse? We're talking about your story,
Yeah.
Angela, we've heard your story, and tomorrow so people will be dying of a drug overdose, drug dealers will be selling, and what is it?
Okay,
What is this?
So the only way basically that I think we could ever win the war on drugs is by educating the kids of today, and starting from a very young age, because once you cut the demand, it will stop the supply. So I mean,
So how do you do that, Shani?
Well, just by bringing a greater awareness to children from a very young age, even as young as 8 years old to 10 years old, on the consequences and the dangers of drugs and drug trafficking. Otherwise, it's just a vicious circuit. It will never stop. So, for example, if I'd met somebody like me when I was a kid, or had some sort of educational program about drugs in the school curriculum, I may never ever have touched drugs.
Very quickly,
Yeah.
Dragons and Butterflies, why?
Why the title?
Yes. Besides all your dragon tattoos all over your body.
Okay, well, the dragon basically symbolizes my wild and dangerous side, and the butterfly is my feminine and artistic side, similar to yin and yang, soft and
Or
hard.
the metamorphosis into the butterfly.
Exactly, the transformation from who I was and becoming who I am.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for writing the book.
Thank you, Niki, for having
What
us
a
on the show.
story, Shani. What a story. Dragons and Butterflies, Sentenced to Die, Choosing to Live, a memoir, Shani Krebbs, and doing incredibly well. And thank you so much, Anne and Angela, for coming in to talk about Catastrophe, Oy Vey, My Child is Gay and an Addict, to read it from the mother's perspective and the denial. It's such an important book as well. So I thank you very much on this important day in June, when we're talking about substance abuse, and we need to be going out and educating our children. Thank you for being so brave and sharing your story.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. And thank you for tuning in. It's been great. I hope you have enjoyed the show. And remember to visit the website www.conversationswithniki.co.za if you miss any part of it. From me, Niki Seberini. Until next week, goodbye.
Hi, my name is Esvia Prinsloo, and I'm the HOD of IT Integration at Bridwin Preparatory School in Melrose. We started using study apps about 6 months ago and have seen astonishing results. We were quite amazed to see how quickly the kids have been able to use study apps and the benefits it has shown with regards to reinforcing what they've already learned inside the classroom. I would highly recommend study apps for any school.
Studyapps.co.za. Conversations with Niki was brought to you by Studyapps.co.za, South Africa's leading education app for tablets.